Okay. So welcome everybody. Thank you very, very much for being on. I wanted to thank several people for being so critical in the publication of this Haggadah. First and foremost, to my dear, dear friend and mentor, Tova Bulau, who has been a source of not only support, but of friendship. And this project could not have seen the light of day without you, Tova. So thank you so very, very much. And the dedication actually reads the following. My deep gratitude, blessings, and love to my dear friend and mentor, Tova Bulau, for the indispensable role she played in the creation of this work. Tova is the epitome of Yehi, or let there be light, the light of God, the light of Torah, the light of Israel and Sion, the light of the world. To you, dear Tova, and your beloved Norman of blessed memory, our blessings for continued reteaching of the message of light, the light of love reaching higher and higher, or Ahava. So thank you so very, very much. And the Haggadah is also written in solidarity with Medinat Yisrael, with the soldiers of Israel. May they all return home peacefully, whole in body and whole in soul. And of course, in the prayer that the hostages, that they return to their families and the evacuees be able to return home. The Haggadah is called Yehi Or because on that dark Shabbat of October 7th, it was in Israel Simchat Torah, when we were ending and beginning the Torah. And the first words of the Torah has God speaking to the darkness and telling the darkness, Yehi Or, let there be light. And now more than ever, we desperately need light. And of course, a great thank you to Shuli, who is not my assistant. She's my co-author. I don't type, so Shuli has typed every word of this manuscript and other manuscripts. But it's not only typing, it's offering advice and insights and comments on phraseology, and more than phraseology, her creative thinking are all over these pages. I also did want to acknowledge the memory of Rabbi Shlomo Kahn, who to my mind was the first person years ago, decades ago, to pen a Haggadah with an English commentary. And thank you also to Shifra Scheinman, who did the cover. What I've been told is that these faces are meant to be the faces of some of the hostages, and this was done a year ago, a long time ago. We pray that they all be freed. And a great thanks to Ben Yehuda Press, to Larry Eulson. He's been so responsive and so wonderful that I'm deeply, deeply grateful. The Haggadah focuses on three primary areas. In thinking about the Haggadah, it was important that it introduce something different, something that's not been done up to now. And so the first element of the Haggadah, where we spend a lot of time on it, and I say we because it is the collective we. This Haggadah is really, it really comes from the many, many Shabbat Haggadol seminars that we experienced together at the Bayit before Rav Stephen, of course, gives these brilliant a la Rabbi Soloveitchik types talks that are just beyond. And so it's a compilation of not only my thinking, but the thinking and the input of so many people. I'm very grateful. What's right about it is theirs, and what's wrong about it, you can put the blame on me. So there is emphasis, first of all, on the structure. When one looks at a Haggadah, it looks like a hodgepodge of paragraphs, and a lot of time is spent on the structure. And the commentary is the second piece. And purposefully, the commentary after the meal is as long and as elaborate as the commentary before the meal. In fact, some would argue that what comes after the meal in terms of its substance is not only as important, but perhaps even more important in terms of its prophetic dream, the dream of a world at peace, Medinat Yisrael at peace, and all of humankind at peace. And while the commentary culls from comments made by great men and women from prior generations, the hope is that it also offers some original, counterintuitive thought. And a third element that is after the structure and the commentary is that there are softer pieces in here that deal with original prayer, taking into account all that's happening in contemporary times, poetry that perhaps someone would find of meaning. And it's anecdotal, it's very, very personal, relating to different experiences over the years that I've been blessed to have. And so those are the three elements: structure, commentary, and then what can be called the three P's: poetry, prayer, and the personal anecdote. So let's begin with the word of structure from the very, very start. On page 1, we describe what can be called the children's Haggadah. And the children's Haggadah begins with the start of the Seder, and it continues through the Manishtana. As a matter of fact, the Talmud says, bringing it to a crescendo with the Manishtana, V'kan haben habat shoel shoelet, and hear the children ask. And so each introductory page to each section is on gray. The aesthetics are very important to me. And what we note here is that there is what can be called the double ritual phenomenon, which appears at the Seder. That is to say, what we normally do once before the Shabbat or the festive meal, we do twice before the Seder meal. And we add other double rituals. And most of these added rituals are first done for children, and they're directed at children. And that's why we're calling this opening phase of the Haggadah the children's Haggadah. And so, as you can see in these two columns, before we eat, we drink wine twice, 2 cups of wine. We wash our hands twice. We do 2 dippings, not 1. We break the matzah. Normally on Shabbat or the holidays, we break the challah, the chalot, once. Here we break the matzot twice. And we even review the history of the Exodus twice. We do it in a childlike way with the Manishtana. And after the Manishtana, beginning with Avadim Hayinu, it begins the adult Haggadah. Now, this is not to say that within the child's Haggadah, there is in depth of meaning. For example, think about Yachatz. Yachatz is that part of the Seder in the beginning where we hide the Afikomen. Normatively, that's understood as a way of keeping the children awake. So they're looking for the Afikomen. But perhaps one could suggest more deeply that the Afikomen, its meaning, its ritual, can be understood along these lines. Matzah is the one ritual symbol in the Haggadah that reflects slavery and freedom. Most of the other symbols reflect one or the other. Bitter herbs, the bitterness of the slavery. Wine, the freedom of a free person. But matzah was the food that we ate in Egypt as poor people, but it was also the food that we ate when we left. There wasn't enough time for the dough to ferment. So in one breath, the matzah is the microcosm of the whole story of from slavery to freedom. And we take the matzah and we break it in half, and one half remains on the table, and the other half is taken off the table. Hopefully the children find it, and that's the last thing that we eat after the meal. And so we write here in the Haggadah on Yachatz the following. Matzah is unique amongst the Seder symbols in that it represents both slavery and freedom. It was the flat, cheap bread we ate in Egypt as slaves, and it was the food we ate when taking leave of Egypt. Thus, the matzah is a microcosm of the Passover story from slavery to freedom. In truth, that story has been repeated throughout history. Persecution after persecution pointed to our inevitable demise. But somehow we prevailed. And so we break the middle matzah. One half remains on the table as we tell the story of our past victory in Egypt, doing so before the Seder meal. The other is set aside to be the last food we eat at the meal, which sets the stage for our expressing the hope for future ultimate redemption. The subject matter of the Haggadah after the Seder. And so this really speaks to the broader structure of the Haggadah. Before the meal, we're telling the story of the slavery and freedom from Egypt. And so half the matzah remains on the table, the middle of the three, as we tell that past story. And the other is the segue into what happens after the Seder. And after the Seder is the story of the future redemption, what we're experiencing these days, and the hope that one day soon, on that day, Bezrat Hashem, finally there'll be shalom and shlemut in Israel and throughout the world. Not surprisingly, we write, the larger piece, after all, no matzah can be split perfectly, is the one designated for later for the Afikoman, as the future redemption will be greater, more significant than any of our past redemptions, even the Exodus from Egypt. So it is fascinating that even in the children's Haggadah, teaching children and listening to children closely, we may think that it's all very surface, very superficial knowledge. No. But within the teaching, the questions and the answers and what children come up with could be tremendous depth, like the Yachatz. It looks like a child's activity, but its meaning is quite deep. And so the children's Haggadah, you must excuse me that we're only able to touch upon particular aspects of of the Haggadah, not all aspects. And we move now to the second section of the Haggadah, and that is the Magid. And the Magid, really it starts with Holach Ma'anya, but for now, starting with Avadim Hayinu, the Magid is the story of the past. And so on page 19, we write, the history of our past redemption makes up the core of the Magid. It is divided into 4 sections. Now, there are parts of this Haggadah which is light reading, but there are other parts which gets pretty heavy. And some of it is here. What are the 4 sections of the past story? There is a storytelling section. And then there is a section of learning, where we actually take sentences from the Torah, a summary of the past story, and we explicate them and we learn them. And then there is another section called the reenacting. We actually reenact the story. And then, of course, what's telling the story of the past without saying 2 words that we often forget to say to those who are closest to us, and those words are thank you. And after a brief discussion of what storytelling is all about and the power of storytelling, we follow the model of the Haggadah, and we begin with Avadim Hayinu. And in the Talmud, there are 2 tales, 2 stories that are told. One is introduced by Shmuel, the more famous one, Avadim Hayinu leFaro b'Mitzrayim. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and it continues for 3 paragraphs, and we explicate upon each. But we don't have the time to go through all of this, of course. But then there is a second formula of storytelling, and that's the formula introduced in the Talmud, in our Pre-Pesachim, by Rav. And if the Shmuel story is more surface, we were slaves and we were freed, Shmuel's story has much, much more, in my opinion, much, much more depth. And so it begins on page 42 with Mitchila Ovdei Avodah Zara Hayu Avotenu. And on that very page, we PowerPoint what was added: spirituality, Israel, leadership, and so on. And so I just want to take just the beginning of what Shmuel, I think, adds to the story. He begins the story with Mitchila Ovdei Avodah Zara Hayu Avotenu Va'achshav Kirvanu Hamakom. So one can't help but notice that while in the first story it was a physical story of how we were in Egypt and we were freed, Rav's story is spiritual. Mitchila Ovdei Avodah Zara Hayu Avotenu. We once worshipped idols, but V'achshav Kirvanu Hamakom Lavodato. But then God brought us to Sinai, and at Sinai we received the Torah. That is to say, for this storyteller, for Rav, redemption is not only freedom from, but freedom to proactively carve out a new mission, receiving and then sharing the Torah's message of ethical monotheism with Israel and the world. And there's another addition that Rav adds, and that is he quotes as his story source, Shenema, as it says, Vayome Yehoshua el Kol Ha'am. And here he's quoting the end of the book of Joshua. That's where the storytelling is coming from. And one wonders why. Why does he quote the story from Joshua from the book of Joshua and not from the Torah itself where it occurred. And so we write, unlike the book of Exodus, Joshua's speech is given after the settling of the land of Israel. Here, Rav, this storyteller, makes clear that built into the story of the Exodus is the centrality of Israel. There are those who claim that the Seder has nothing to do with Israel. There are those who claim that Passover, no less than Maimonides in the Guide of the Perplexed in the Moreh Nevuchim, he says Sukkot is the holiday of Israel. Passover, that is the holiday of the Exodus from Egypt. It was freedom from. But here I disagree, humbly disagree. And that's why I think we're quoting from the book of Joshua. Joshua, Israel, is not apart from the Passover story. It is built in. It is a part of the story. Hence the words of Joshua. And in this story, something more is added. Here's what Joshua says. Vayoma Yoshua el kol ha'am. This is after the land was basically settled. Ko amar Adonai Elohei Yisrael. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel. And he begins the story. Be'ever hanahar yashvu avotechem me'olam. Your ancestors formerly dwelt beyond the river. And here's an opportunity to talk a little bit about leadership, because the leadership of the Jewish people started be'ever hanahar. It started on the other side of the river. In fact, Abraham is called Avraham HaIvri, say the rabbis, because everybody was on one side of the river, while Abraham and Sarah, they were the lone voices introducing the monoistic order, introducing God into the world. And so we write, at its core, leadership involves identifying a need and doing something about it, demanding change. All the leadership gurus will tell you the definition of leadership is change. It is standing up for a cause, not because it is popular, but because it's right. The founder of Judaism, Abraham, our patriarch, showed the way as he introduced one of the most novel ideas in the annals of human history, belief in one God. But Abraham was alone in this belief. Resistance to change is inevitable. And that's the way leadership works. There's a need. There are individuals who respond, but people don't like change. And so there was resistance to change. Resistance to change is inevitable primarily because people are naturally comfortable with the status quo. Sometimes the resistance is extreme, literally extreme. And so Abraham comes from Ur Kasdim, and the Medrash understands that he was literally thrown into the Ur of Kasdim, into the fire because of his detractors who attempted to murder him. And when we think of any cause of meaning, virtually every cause that took hold never started from the mainstream, always started from the fringe. And so we write, neither the American Civil Rights Movement nor the anti-Vietnam War movement began in the mainstream. So too the struggle to free Ethiopian Jewry, or Glenn Richter and Yaakov Birnbaum, the struggle to free Soviet Jewry. And of course, when you're out there and you're alone, you are subject to an avalanche of criticism. These are just a few examples of how this story embellishes, Rob's story embellishes upon Shmuel. Now, between the two stories, there are 3 paragraphs that are part of the Shmuel story, the physical story of departure. And there are 3 paragraphs that are part of the spiritual story of Rav. In between is the famous 4 children. better translated, not 4 sons, but better translated, 4 children. And it's like the halftime between the 2 halves of the stories. And I call the 4 children, I headline it as an educational interlude. And the goal of the educational interlude is to remind the storyteller to tell the story in a way that those around the table can receive it. And what makes it complicated is that no 2 people are the same. And therefore, the great teachers, the great parents, the great transmitters of ideas understand they have to shape the story al pi darko, chanoch lanar al pi darko, educate the story in a way that a child can understand. And so one could see this storytelling part of the Haggadah as being the physical story, the spiritual story, and in between, this educational message of when you share the story, it should be shared and tailored in a way that each child can understand. There are children who are chachamim. There's a child who's a rasha. There's a child who's a tam or a sheino yodei alisho. But even there, we try to be somewhat creative. And so, for example, in the story of the rasha, what we're told about the rasha is that he is such a rebel. The rasha is such a rebel that the advice given in the text, and here I'm on page 36, is hakei et shinav, which literally means blunt his teeth. After all, the wicked child separates from the community. How many times do we hear the message from different people where people say, oh, my child has left the family, has left the fold. And here what's being said, hakei et shinav. But, and this is the style of the Haggadah, I'd like to see it very differently. Hakei, which is spelled hey, kuf, hey, hey, can be seen as the name of God. It doesn't mean blunt or knockout. It's the name of God, as each of its letters refers to God. Hey, kuf, hakei, that's God's name. In the same breath, shinav may be related to the word vishinantem, and you shall teach your children. From this perspective, the response to the rebellious child should be to offer teachings that are suffused with God's love. The pathway to the soul is not harsh words, but words reflecting unconditional love. Kind of Hasidic way of turning around what on the surface is a harsh message of how to educate this child into a much softer, loving message. And even the tam, the simple child on page 39, that child asks, Mazot, what is this? And so we think it's a simple question. What is this? But interestingly, on page 38 in the commentary, Zot does not denote a simple question. The word Zot most often refers to something complex. For example, when we lift the Torah, what do we say? This Zot HaTorah, and this is the Torah, referring to the sacredness of the book, which requires careful analysis. And that's the way Zot appears throughout Tanakh. Sometimes we hear a question and we assume it is shallow, but beneath the surface, it is the deepest of the deep. And of course, these 4 children represent different voices in our community. And the power of the story of the 4 is that they're all at the same table. And if we need something more than anything else today, it's to bring people together from disparate backgrounds. That's what Israel needs most. That's what the world needs most. And so we actually try to set forth here certain principles of discourse. How can we disagree? How can we dialogue peacefully? And towards that end, I'd like to just show you a glimpse of a poem. And this poem was actually professionally done by the Wexner Foundation, and it was written in English, but the Hebrew, which is far more beautiful than the English, was translated by the great Dr. Avigdor Shinan. And in this Haggadah, we suggest this reading after the four children to kind of complete this storytelling phase. And so step back, and I hope you'll enjoy this poem.
A Pintele Yid, a lonely Jew, a vulnerable Jew.
A Pintele Yid, יהודי בודד, יהודי שברירי.
A Pintele Yud, a lone mark, a tiny Hebrew letter.
A Pintele Yud, סימן בודד, אות עברית זעירה.
A Yud aside another, a Jew beside another, evokes the name of God in unity. God sees it is good.
ניצבת יוד בצד יוד, עומד יהודי בצד אחיו, ופורץ שם האלוהים באחדות. וירא אלוהים כי טוב.
Unity is never uniformity. Uniformity is uniform, crushing other views. Unity is unitied, united despite differences.
אחדות לעולם איננה אחידות, כי האחידות היא ריסוק של דעות אחרות. אך אחדות היא חיי יחד, למרות כל ההבדלים.
Dear God, help us to know that Am Yisrael is more than the nation of Israel. We are family.
או אלוהים היקר, סייע לנו להכיר שעם ישראל הוא יותר מעם, שכולנו בני משפחה אחת.
And the test of family is not how we love when we agree, but how we love when we disagree.
ומשפחה נבחנת לא רק באהבתה כשכולה בדעה אחת, אלא כיצד היא אוהבת כשאין בקרבה הסכמה.
May we be careful with our words, for while a word is a word and a deed is a deed, words we say can lead to harmful, fatal deeds.
נקפיד על מוצא שפתנו כי בעוד מילה היא מילה ומעשה הוא מעשה, דברים היוצאים מן הפה עלולים להביא לתוצאות נוראות איומות.
May we not question the motives of the other, but instead listen to the other, learn from the other.
לא נערער על מניעיו של האחר, אדרבה, נאזין אל האחר, נלמד מן האחר.
Sing and dance the psalmist stream. Behold how beautiful, how sweet sisters and brothers together.
נרקוד ונשיר את חזונו של המשורר, הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד.
Illuminate the Hasidic vision. Every Yid has a single light that begins and ends, but together our lights fuse endless, eternal.
האר את חזונה של החסידות. לכל יהודי יש אור מיוחד משלו הנדלק ודועך, אך יחדיו מתמזגים אורותינו בלא קץ לעולמים.
With you, in unity, as family, in togetherness with light forever.
עמך באחדות כמשפחה יחדיו באור נצחי.
Help us declare I am a kitzonit, an extremist Jew, not on the right, not on the left, but an extremist in loving other Jews.
Azor lanu להכריז, כי יהודי קיצוני אני, לא לימין או לשמאל, אלא קיצוני באהבת אחי היהודים, אהבת ישראל.
The entire team at the Wexner Foundation wishes you and your...
And so after the storytelling, we move to the next section of the past, and we do some heavy learning, some very, very heavy learning. And we take 4 sentences from the book of Deuteronomy. Interestingly, it's from that section which quotes or which directs what a farmer should say when bringing the first fruits to Jerusalem. Again, Israel is central in the Haggadah. It's central in the learning section as well. What we learn are actually the sentences that are said by this holy farmer. And there are 4 sentences, and why we choose it from Deuteronomy, not from the book of Exodus. That's something you may want to look into the Haggadah and study it carefully. It's part of the heaviness of the Haggadah. And we talk about the exile, how the exile started, and then anti-Semitism and our call for relief, and finally, freedom. Now, one could spend hours on this. The way to study this, the way we studied this, was to first, I studied with my son the midrashic material on these sentences found in the Sifrei, but then we tried to write our own midrash. Towards the end, and I'm sure you recall when we're spilling wine, dipping our finger into the wine and spilling the wine, we list the makot, we list the 10 plagues. But what's lesser known is that when we're listing the 10 plagues, and this is in the section of freedom, there are really 2 understandings of the sentence of biyad chazakah. The second interpretation will be that it refers to the plagues. Biyad chazakah, that's 2 plagues. Uvizroa nituya, it's another 2 plagues. But in the first section, if one looks at it, biyad chazakah, well, most understand this to be the plagues again. It's complex. It talks about pestilence. It talks about a sword. It's all very complex. And we try to say whatever we say on this, and it's something that unfortunately I don't have time to get into, but I want to spend just a moment on the last word, and that is the word uvimoftim, and with wonders on page 76. And this first approach to Biyad Chazakah, we label it as God's intercession throughout Jewish history. This is to be distinguished from the second approach, which is God intervening and taking us out of Egypt. Here it's God's intercession throughout Jewish history. And so on the word uvimoftim, and with wonders, which in the second section is going to be the plagues, this is what we have to say. Even as God steps in, it is only a matter of time until savage enemies attempt to attack, destroy, and annihilate the Jewish people. For me, the imagery of the Haggadah with its support text, explicating wonders as blood and fire and a pillar of smoke. In this uvimoftim, we say, Zeh Hadam, this is the blood. And then we're quoting a sentence from Yoel, Dam, blood, Va'ish, and fire, the Timrot Ashan, and pillars of smoke. And one wonders, what is that imagery? And imagery doesn't only speak to what occurred thousands of years ago. Imagery speaks to us in contemporary times. So for me, the imagery of the Haggadah with its support text, explicating wonders as blood and fire and a pillar of smoke, may evoke remembrances of the Holocaust, when our blood was spilled as our lives were taken in gas chambers, leading to our being cast into the oven fire with its accompanying smoke. Let's think about this imagery. Blood. Our blood was spilled when we were killed. Va'ish. How were we killed? We were killed, of course, by the gas, and then we were taken into the furnace, and we were burnt. The Timrot Ashan, and people in the camps would look up, and they would see the smoke ascending from the chimneys. And then I'd write, just a few years after the Shoah, a wondrous intervention. With God's help, the state of Israel is born. Here, God no longer acts unilaterally. Having matured as a people, we are expected to partner with God to realize the dream of the Jewish state. Thus, blood, fire, smoke may represent in a dramatically different way the battles Israel fought and continues to fight to defend itself. You see what we've done here? That blood, fire, and pillars of smoke, that could be the imagery of the Shoah, but it can also be the imagery of our response of the Israeli Defense Forces. From this perspective, the spilling of wine from the Seder cup, as we call out blood and fire and a pillar of smoke, may symbolize for our generation the spilling of Jewish blood when we were victimized during the Shoah, and the spilling of blood over the years as thousands of soldiers and victims of terror gave and lost their lives for Israel. And with that interpretation, we're trying to make this story resonate in contemporary times, this relationship between the Shoah and the state of Israel. There would have been a state of Israel without the Shoah, but there will never again be a Shoah because there is a state of Israel. And the best proof is what we're seeing today. Hamas is on the borders of Israel. Hezbollah, if we didn't have a state of Israel, they would come in and do what their charter calls them to do, and that is to annihilate Jews. And here, by the way, the concept of the blood that we're normally associating with Egyptian blood, you can't be fully joyous as even the enemy is dying. But in this first interpretation, it's our blood that we are crying about. And then Haggadah continues with a discussion of the blood, and we move then into the third section of the past. We've done the storytelling, we've done some learning, and then there's the actual reenacting. We actually point to the shank bone, to the Pesach that represents the Passover sacrifice, the Korban Pesach, and we lift the matzah. That's yet another symbol, the matzah, the bitterness, the matzah that we ate when we were in Egypt and when we left, and moror itself. Now that is another step. We're not just telling the story, we're not just verbally learning, we're lifting, we're reenacting that moment with real ritual. You've heard me say many times, I don't believe the Shoah will be remembered unless it's going to be ritualized. There is nothing in Jewish history that's been remembered that has not been ritualized. It has to be ritualized. And that is why at the end of that section, we say, B'chol dor v'dor, chayav adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu hu nigal. And Maimonides reads it, it's not that in every generation we should see ourselves as if we're redeemed, but we should show ourselves as if we're being redeemed. We have to re-experience it. We're reenacting it. And it's here that we offer another suggestion that a prayer be said for the state of Israel. After all, this is the ultimate reenactment, the reenactment of what we experienced on October 7th, and as dark as those times have been, the remarkable response of people in Israel and in America and throughout the world doing what they can to make sure that Israel remains safe. And so, just for a moment, a little nigun, a song, a prayer for Israel, which is called Please, Please, Please. I'm a little off key, I hope you don't mind, but Rabbi Ezra Zelickson saved the day, and so this is the nigun that we wrote, that we're suggesting for the Haggadah.
Ribono shalom lamana al tazeinu Ribono shalom lamana azor lanu levadecha בחטופינו, למשפחותיהם להשיב המפונים לבתיהם, לרפא פצועינו, בשלמות לגמור חיילינו, לעתידות לנחם אבלינו, בגישות ענה, ענה, ענה.
And then, of course, we're going to move from this third of the four sections of the fast into Thanksgiving. Can one experience events of such redemption without saying those simple words, the word of thanksgiving? And we write in the introduction to Thanksgiving, and there are two types of thank yous. There's a thank you that's kind of pro forma, when somebody gives me their seat, which I now appreciate much more than in the past. But then there's a kind of thank you which comes from the word hoda'ah, mission, where I say thank you to you, and what I'm really saying, I couldn't have done it without you. And that's what we're saying as we remember the past, with all that we've experienced. We say to God, thank you. Modim anachnu lach. We could not have done it. We could not have done it without you. It's a good time for everybody at the Seder table to turn to each other, to those closest, and say, thank you. There's so much in life I couldn't have done without you. And I really feel that the only way a person can feel whole, can feel free, is if you can say thank you. And with that, we say a blessing over wine, which celebrates, if you will, the past redemption, and we move into the present. The present begins with ratzo, when we wash our hands and we're going to eat the bread and we're going to eat the maror. We're actually ingesting. We're ingesting. We're taking events of today and we're saying it even more powerfully than before, that they echo, that they are, as Proust used to say, wrote, it's remembrances of things past. And in the Haggadah, we spend a lot of time trying to explain how each of these pieces fits into that category. The one I've chosen to share with you is the korech part of the Seder, which is in the present, taking us into the meal. It's when we take two pieces of matzah from the top and the bottom, and we create a sandwich, and in the middle we put the bitter herbs. And we write about the korech. We take the maror, symbolic of challenging times, and we pack it between matzot, the food consumed immediately after leaving Egypt, and eat it as one. Moments of highs and lows. You see, the matzah is the freedom. That's what we ate when we left. In between, the bitter herbs. It's mixed, it's fused. Truth be told, bad and good experiences most often are not compartmentalized. Often the two mesh. In this spirit, just an anecdote, I'll be thinking of Alon, a jewelry manufacturer who lost his son Adir in Gaza. Although in deep mourning, Alon was moved by weddings that took place on army bases in the midst of the war. As he explains, and these are his words, this is a man who had just lost his son. I decided I'm going to donate a ring. On Facebook, I wrote, the first soldier who is ready to propose, I will give a ring. When a second called, I couldn't turn him away. Since then, it's 81 rings. And since this has been written, I think it's another 100. They pick it up, and the best part is to get a hug from the soldiers. Hamas wanted to take our life to prevent the building of a house in Israel. And what I'm doing is the opposite. A deer won't build a home in Israel, but because of him, a lot of people will. A deer is still with us, and this is my win. And we eat. And we eat, I argue, is also a celebration of the present. And if you want to pick up Haggadah, and you'll see how we try to understand even the eating to be as an expression of our Jewishness. And then we moved to what happened after the Seder. And what happens after the Seder is the hope for future redemption. We're taking a leap from that past into the future. And we begin doing so by opening the door for Elijah. Why open the door for Elijah? Because he's the harbinger of the coming of the Messiah. But here we spend a lot of time talking about the verbiage that is used when we open the door for Elijah. We say, Shvo chamatcha, pour out your wrath. These are very, very tough sentences. Shlomo Carlebach used to say that the real text should be Shvo ahavatcha, but that's not what the text says. It says Shvo chamatcha, pour out your wrath. And what we try to argue is that the real Eliyahu is a softer Eliyahu. The Eliyahu in the prophet was a zealot. He says to God, Kano kineti, I am zealous before the Lord. But the only time Eliyahu's name is really mentioned in the whole Haggadah is in the grace after meal, which we also argue, by the way, is a microcosm of the whole Exodus story. And there we say, Harachaman hu yishlach lanu et Eliyahu hanavi zachu latov. And it's right then that we talk about the hope that parents and children and grandchildren and siblings and grandparents will come together in the spirit of peace. And that's Eliyahu. And then we begin the text that talks about the future redemption. And we do so by reciting the end pieces of the Hallel, which talk about national redemption. For example, we say, Yivorech et Beit Yisrael. Yivorech et Beit Yisrael. May the day come when you will bless the Jewish people. And just to give you some examples, because on virtually every line we offer some humble commentary, but if you were to turn to the Min HaMeitzah on page 168, that's the part of the Hallel text where we say, Min HaMeitzah karatika, out of distress I call upon you. And here anecdotally on page 168, I write, after the Yom Kippur War, a rabbi visited wounded Israeli soldiers, singing and trying to offer meaning to Rev Nachman's words, the whole world is a narrow bridge, but the main thing is to recall. To recall is to have no fear at all. A seriously injured soldier thanked the rabbi for his interpretations, adding that Rev Nachman's words related to his personal war experience. This is after the 1973 war. This is what he said. I was part of the brigade that threw pontoon bridges over the Suez Canal just days after we suffered catastrophic losses. Our leader, General Ariel Sharon, told us, defend this bridge with every ounce of your strength. It is our lifeline, Israel's lifeline for survival. That night, this soldier said, the whole world for me was that narrow bridge. And then there are other sections of the Min HaMeitzah. For example, it says, Pitchu li Shari Tzedek, open up the gates of righteousness. Tzadikim yavouvo, let the righteous come in. And on page 171, we write, but who decides who is righteous? Open up the gates so that the righteous will come in. Again, this is all cast into the future. And we write here, only God. And his assessment may be very different from others. A personal anecdote. At a rabbinic conference many years ago, a senior colleague turned to me and said, Avi, you're so non-judgmental that for you there's no such thing as a righteous or wicked person. Respectfully, I responded, I'm sure there is, but I'll let God decide who falls into which category. And so we try to offer that type of commentary on the Haggadah because it's so very, very important. It's so much part of the story. And there's a text here, Me'et Adonai haita zot, from the Lord was this. And I recalled here the story of Garth Brooks, who is a devout Christian. He's a family person, but he tells the story that when he was a teenager, he would turn to God. He was a religious teenager. And he said, I have only one wish. I want to marry this girl in my class. But she jilted him and they never married. And he went on, married someone else, happy marriage, many children. But he always wondered about that girl, about whom he had a real flame. And but at one of his concerts, the old flame showed up and went behind the curtain. And in this song that Garth Brooks writes, he writes, thank you, God, that when I prayed for this, you said no, no. Sometimes the best answer from God is no. And so we quote that here. Me'et Adonai haita zot, from the Lord was this. What does that mean, from the Lord was this? Sometimes even when denying our requests, God saves us. And so Garth Brooks wrote, sometimes I thank God for unanswered prayers. Remember when you're talking to the man upstairs, that just because he doesn't answer doesn't mean he don't care. Some of God's greatest gifts are unanswered prayers. But we don't stop at national redemption. The Hallel continues and moves into universal redemption. And we start praying the praise we offer on Shabbat morning, Nishmat Kol Chai. We're waiting for that time when all souls are going to praise the Lord. Nishmat Kol Chai, the breath of all living souls. On page 182, I write, at creation, the Lord God breathed into Adam the breath of life, what the Torah also calls the image of God. This contrasts with Michelangelo's painting extraordinaire of God's finger touching Adam, bringing him to life, limiting the creation process to the physical realm. Breathing into another is an intimate portrayal of God's love for all of humankind. Our task is to breathe out the breath God breathed into us. Only when all human beings engage in this holy process, only then, only when the breath of life extols God in his characteristics of kindness, goodness, and mercy, will redemption come. And we move through the Nishmat Kol Chai and the Yishtabach. Do you see? National redemption, universal redemption. And then we drink. You know why there are 4 cups of wine? I'll tell you why. As I grow older, I like simple. The first cup we all understand, it's Kiddush. The second cup we drank after we finished the story of the past redemption. The third cup we drink after the grace after meals, after the meal, after the story of the present redemption. And the last cup we're going to drink now, after the story of the universal redemption. And so it fits very well in that the drinking is a celebration of what we're talking about. As a matter of fact, some people drink 5 cups because they drink a cup after the national redemption text, and then again after the universal redemption. And with that, we move, if you can see now the structure, it's moving from the children's Haggadah, past, before the meal, present, the meal, future, the Hallel, and now it's bidding farewell. And when we bid farewell, we offer 6 different songs, which we try to offer commentary on. One song is Yehi b'chatzi halayla. It was in the middle of the night. And it recorded in the Haggadah are all the middle of the nights. You know, Elie Wiesel called his book on the Shoah night. The middle of the night, that's the night of the nights. When it looks like there is no hope. But when you get to the middle of the night, the next step is you're moving closer to the dawn. And all the middle of the nights are mentioned there. As a matter of fact, in 1976, after Entebbe, when the Israeli Air Force went in to save the hostages, although Mrs. Block was killed and Yoni Netanyahu, but basically the hostages, almost all of them, came out. A very famous song came out, and what are the first words of the song? B'chatzi halayla, it's midnight. Precisely when you think there is no hope, there is hope. Vayehi b'chatzi halayla. And I love the last verse of Vayehi b'chatzi halayla. It's on page 204, where we say on page 204, Korev yom asher hu lo yom v'lo laila. And we write, there is a mystical theory that people reflect the physical settings within which they live. In Israel, for example, the time between sunset and darkness seems relatively short. In other words, it's either day or night. Most Israelis, I believe, think accordingly in absolutes. You're either right or wrong. You're either with me or against me. Yes, it's either day or night. That's why the time between sunset and the stars coming out is very short. On a very personal level, I know this phenomenon well. As a younger activist, I took positions wherein I could not see any truth aside from my own. But as I grew older, I came to recognize that Israel will not make it with the right alone or the left alone. Concerning Israel and the well-being of the Jewish community, each side has much to contribute. And so in our Seder song, we sing, Korev yom asher hu lo yom v'lo laila. The day will come when it is no longer day or night. This is the dream of twilight expanded, wherein opposites not only coexist, but for the sake of the greater good, contract to make space for the other, thus thriving and flourishing in dialectic. And the song continues, and each one could have an hour shiur on them. And we get to the sweetest end song, the Haggadah. You know, one kid, and at some Seders, participants try to act out the dog, woof, woof, the cat, meow. What we suggest in our Haggadah is that Chad means one, and Gadya comes from Agadic, one story, that everyone around the Seder table should tell one story of something they did to help make this world a better world, but using the subjects of the Haggadah as their jump off point. If we go to page 236, for example, so on 236, I write, Haggadah may not only mean one kid, but one story. Indeed, Chad means one, Echad. Gadya sounds like lahagid, the telling of a story, and so on and so forth. And the toughest one for me to find anecdotally was the cat. So I'll read to you what I wrote about the cat. The cat was the one that ate the kid, if you remember. The cat reminds me of Jerusalem. As there, as in few other places, cats are everywhere. Anecdotally, the face of a cat looks something like the little fuzzies. Do you remember I used to give out those fuzzies? And it said, Ravavi thinks I'm great. I used to give out to the youngsters when I was serving as rabbi of the Bayit. Attached to the fuzzy was a small note which read, Ravavi thinks I'm great. And some of the fuzzies, they had faces of a cat. That was my way of sharing with each of these children that they have the capacity to make a real contribution to better the world. The idea came from my brother Mordechai, a master rabbi educator, who gave these fuzzies out to students in this school he led for decades. Morty used to give them out. I wasn't sure I should do the same, as it seemed a bit corny. Right about then, however, I visited IDF troops during the Second Lebanon War. There's a typo here. In 2006, I met the head of the tank corps, and we began talking. So I'm talking to this head of a tank corps. Introducing ourselves, he was flabbergasted. He had been a student in my brother's school. With deep emotion, he said to me, "And you know what got me through this war?" Putting his hand in his pocket, he pulled out a tarred fuzzy. "That's how I made it. Rabbi Mordechai's fuzzy gave me the confidence that I could succeed. That moment inspired me to give out fuzzies by the hundreds in the hope that maybe for one child it would make a difference and inspire them, like this young man, the head of the tank corps, to reach for the possible." And although the Seder formally ends here at our Seder, we always sing the Hatikva, which is the song of hope. It's the song of redemption. And I close with this comment on the Hatikva. At one point, we say in the Hatikva, page 245, Kolot Valeva Penimad, and we say, Ayin Litzion Sophia, with eyes looking forward to Zion, which I understand to be with eyes from a distance seeing Zion. And here's what we write. Jeremiah the prophet proclaims, Merachok Hashem nireli, from afar the Lord appeared to me, declaring my love for you is everlasting. There is, I believe, great beauty in this observation. When looking at each other, when looking closely at people we love most, even ourselves, we see warts and wrinkles, traits and habits we may not like. When stepping back, however, surveying the whole scene, the picture alters. The downside is overwhelmed by all the good we see in the other and in ourselves. The ugly spots are eclipsed by the wholeness of the beauty we behold. In this spirit, looking toward Zion from afar may give us a greater appreciation of Israel. From a distance, we can better acknowledge the miracle of a fledgling state that, in its short lifetime, made possible what seemed impossible. And then I list, in the spirit of Dayenu, stuff that we take for granted, but when we step back, we could see how remarkable the birth of Israel is about. And here's what we say in the spirit of Dayenu. If Israel had only increased in size from 600,000 Jews in 1948 to a country now of 10 million with 7.7 million Jews together, making up about 50% of Jews worldwide, Dayenu. If Hebrew, a language all but forgotten 150 years ago, would only have been reborn, with millions conversing in the holy tongue, agreeing, arguing in business and social settings, in love, in prayer, Dayenu, Dayenu, Dayenu. Thank you, thank you. And with that, our Haggadah comes to its close as I remind the readers of the story I heard from Daniela Grunfeld, who said to me that when her children used to get on the bus and she would wave bye-bye to them when they were little children, my dear Daniela, she would say bye-bye this way. She would reverse our hands. And as we say goodbye to the Seder, we're saying, don't leave us so quickly. This message of could be the middle of the night, past, present, and future, but we know that in the end, the day is coming. That day is coming one day soon, when God willing, Israel will be at peace and the world will be at peace. As Rav Yehuda Halevi wrote, Darashti kirvatcha, b'chol libi kraticha, u'b'tzeti likratcha, likrati mitzaticha, I have sought your nearness. With all my heart have I called you, and going out to meet you, I found you coming toward me. Thank you for your time, and Acharon Chaviv, I wanted to thank my dear friend Aaron Frank, who encouraged me to write this Haggadah. As you get older, and to find that energy is not so simple. I'm very, very grateful to Aaron for pushing me. And, in the end, you write. You'd like people to read what you write, but you write because you have a need to write. It's part of a soulful creativeness. And I thank all of you for listening, and we can open it up. If any of you have any thoughts on this, by all means.